Welcome, everybody, to the first of our special GDC 2008 podcast. This is the One Up Yours podcast. I'm Garnet Lee, coming to you on Tuesday, February the 19th. Joining me is the usual cast plus a special guest. Let's go to it. We've got Shane Bettenhausen here in an odd chair next to me on the left.
I thought I'd mix it up. I've never sat over here. It feels very different.
Yeah, but you should also describe what he's wearing.
Well,
wearing a tie.
I tell you,
I'm never wearing a tie again.
we could do the Joan Rivers here. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't think it doesn't make for good radio. All right.
I don't know. We should put down. You're in a very black and white.
Please.
You're all black and white.
I'm wearing
no color.
It's not news that I'm wearing a tie.
No,
yeah,
but it's news that you have no color. Where's the accent? Black tie, white shirt, black pants.
You earlier said I look like a Nazi Mormon. Or was that you?
I didn't say that. I did not say that you look like a Nazi
Maybe it was Amy
Mormon.
who said that. I just spoiled who our secret guest.
Well, everybody already knew that. That is Amy Hennig, who is in your chair right now, and I didn't ask her ahead of time. So what is your official titling?
Queen of Naughty Dog?
Now it's creative director at Naughty Dog.
Nice.
Awesome.
I was game director on Uncharted.
Excellent.
And I didn't say that he looked like I just
a
agreed.
Nazi Mormon?
I only agreed with it.
Well, who should we? You know, it got to be Greg Ford. He's not here.
Must have been.
It was Greg.
That's who said it. And we have Brian Intihar across from me. He's the
Hello.
previews senior editor for the One Up Network, and Sean Elliott also, who's you're
PC
executive editor for PC for the group. Andrew's here, running the wheels of steel. We're ready to roll. So let's do a quick launch. Did anybody see anything that they just stood out to them today at GDC?
Well, today is the second day of GDC, but it's not the first real days until tomorrow, Wednesday. What's going on?
Right, IGF stuff.
Right,
today.
what's going on today is like independent, like indie games and mobile games. So there isn't a lot of stuff to go see today. So don't expect fireworks and miracles here.
Well,
I don't think you're expecting fireworks and miracles all week.
There might be a miracle or a firework.
Maybe a couple, but not many. Not as many as past years.
GDC has sort of changed complexion, though, at least over the last 2 or 3 years, especially. Amy, what's it been like watching GDC morph over the last few years?
Well, I've been watching it more from afar because the last 2 years I had deadlines to come.
From a developer's perspective, then.
Well, this will be like I said, my first year in 3 years, so we'll see. I'll get back to you on that.
Well,
but it's certainly gotten way more slick than it was originally. I mean, it didn't used to have like costume contests and people running around in capes and stuff like that. I'm sort of glad I missed those years because it gives me the crawlies. But it's a lot more like a real industry event now with a lot more press and fancy demos and things like that.
It's definitely been changing. I remember 2 years ago when it was in San Jose when Iwata gave a keynote.
Right.
And there was a guy dressed as Mario out front with a sign that said, Iwata dropped the bomb. That was the point at which I knew that GDC was changing. And it's only gotten slicker and more into like a PR press media event, which it isn't supposed to be.
Well, it is supposed to be whatever it's supposed to be, but it wasn't.
A conference for developers.
It wasn't envisioned. How about this? It wasn't envisioned as that. I think that the vision that CMP has for GDC has changed.
Maybe since E3 has diminished, then they kind of realized they could take a little bit of that sizzle.
I think that's really reflected in the show that you see here now. But there's still definitely a developer's air to it, right?
It's true.
Are you gonna go to sessions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've got it all plotted out for the next 3 days, and I'm not speaking this year, maybe next year, but it's from the developer's perspective. I think it still does feel like a developer's show. For me anyway, I'm oblivious to all the press stuff going around us, but
we haven't ruined it for you yet.
No, not for me personally.
I was just going to ask you, how do you feel that media's there at the event? Does it bother you, or like you said, not really, kind of oblivious?
I mean, maybe it's not fair for me to speak because I was only here 3 years ago.
Okay, because we do this on the show anyway. We have mild interruption. Andrew, what he's saying is Lauren is here now.
Lauren is actually here. Good.
Lauren is here.
I thought I was going to have to carry the whole show myself.
The entire show.
You could absolutely carry the show.
No.
I have no doubt that you could carry the show.
Since you've been here, has anyone asked for your autograph?
Petrified. No, and it's
no Uncharted cosplayers running up to you being like,
oh man, if I had thought of it, I would have actually
signed
my copy of Uncharted for you to sign.
Sign my half-tuck shirt.
That's right, the half tuck. I love Tim Schafer for that so much.
You know what? No one caught it, but 4 weeks ago I co-hosted Techzilla and I actually did have my shirt tucked in and the other half not. Just for that. Patrick Norton looks at me. He's like, "What is with your shirt, man?" I'm like, "Don't worry, we'll see if anyone catches it." No one caught it. It was funny though. We had a good time with it. And so Andrew's going right now to go get Lauren to bring him back so we can keep on talking about this stuff. You know what I'm going to get to talk about tomorrow, which I can't spill yet, but I want to see how people are interested, and I'll look at the feedback and see what questions I can answer. We saw Peter today, Peter Molyneux,
About Fable.
and Fable 2, and I know what I'm interested in talking about tomorrow from what I saw, but if anyone wants to like throw us something on the boards, I'll look at them tomorrow before we do our show and see if I can answer your question based off what they showed. Cool. I mean, you'll have heard some of it by then. You'll see Jen Sal's writing our preview.
I'm definitely very interested in see what you have to say about it.
That's interesting. It's interesting. Have you been over to the show yet, Sean?
I haven't. No, I've been podcasting right before this. I did get to play a little audio surf though.
And
I saw you playing that, and like
that's fun.
I walked by your cube and I was like, that must be audio surf.
Yeah. Quick thing about that is that. Well, you remember the old games? So it was Amplitude, and then there was another one that was very much Frequency. They're very much similar. It's like that, but you can import whatever audio file you want, and I think that's the big breakthrough that makes it worthwhile.
Right.
Because, I mean, if you want to come at it as just something to do with your fingers while you're listening to music and bobbing your head along to the music anyway, it works in that capacity. I'm at the point now where I'm trying to discover just to what extent the puzzle game is there. Oftentimes, like when you play a really good puzzle game like a Luminous or something, the first few hours you play it, you're sort of sub-vocalizing every move, and you're trying to get a grasp on the system, and then all of a sudden, there's that everything falls into place. Sometimes literally, if it's falling blocks, and then you, and then from there on, you just really explore the possibilities. But just in the very beginning state, it's got a lot of potential, and it's got the fun aspect where you can throw in any audio file. So just like random, internet, YouTube goofballs and stuff, you can throw those in there. And
it's distributed through Steam, right?
It is, and it's like the #1 Steam game right now, and it's only like $8.99.
Nice.
And it seems like it's proven to be immensely popular.
All
right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a invisible to you break, but when we come back in just a moment, Lauren Lanning will be joining us, so hold on 1 second. We'll get him set and ready to go, and we'll be right back with that. All right, and we are back from that magic break. And now joined by Mr. Lauren Lanning. I am very glad to have you here. It's an honor to the podcast and all of us, just like Amy.
Yeah, I'm honored too.
Well, so am I.
Just trying to be fair there with the introductions. And also, I didn't get Lauren's titling correct from the beginning anyway. So who are you anyway?
I'm president and co-founder of Oddworld Inhabitants, and I work under the boss.
Under the boss?
Yeah, the CEO.
Hi, boss.
So I always cringe when someone says, Lauren Lanning, CEO. I'm like, oh, sure, it's going to kill me.
So we run down a quick little glimpse at what we saw on the first day of GDC, a little IGF stuff. Let's do what we came here for, which is talk about character games, right? Where should we start? You saw the questions, Amy. So
I glimpsed them, yes.
Where I thought we'd kick off this conversation is talking about where the creative process for you guys starts in building a compelling character-driven adventure game.
You want to lead this?
I want to lead the whole thing. That's what I want to do.
Push her.
There you go. Hold on, I have a hand grenade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These are hard questions to answer, actually, because if they were magic answers, then we would probably write books or be a lot better at what we do or something. But it's a messy process, and it's iterative. I mean, that's really the thing. If you sit down thinking that you're going to get it all figured out in one go and there's going to have some flash of inspiration, then you're doomed. It's working with a lot of people with a lot of different ideas, iterating on those ideas again and again, doing a lot of research and reading and getting inspired by different things, letting things just sort of marinate. It's organic, right?
Yeah, it's and then I admit, we always came from it from a slightly different approach from most game designers that I know, and I think their approach is smarter. So I don't claim that this is the right way at all. But for me, it was like I didn't design games because I wanted to be a game designer. I designed games because I wanted to create characters that people really connected to, that were connected to issues that I thought were important. So it was like the idea of doing more Coke commercials or more of the things that, we've done plenty of in the past just had lost all appeal to me. And it was about, well, how do we, if we sit down and eat a bag of potato chips, it tastes great while we're eating it. But then when you're done, you might have spent an hour and you were eating it. It was great. But when you're done, you're just empty, but you're full of some shit and it has no real value.
That's the kind of game I make.
But I saw the ending to Uncharted. I feel you.
Let's not do that yet, all right?
Man.
That's round 2.
Out of here.
Before we get to that, though,
she knows I love the game.
since we have Amy and Lauren here. I mean, it's different. I see a big difference between the Oddworld, Quintology, and Uncharted. I mean, to pick like your most recent game versus your oldest game, but like Oddworld has what appears to me an uncompromising approach. Like no one could have told you maybe these guys shouldn't look slimy, maybe they should be plush and lovable, so the kids will put them on a Happy Meal. Whereas Uncharted seems to be more, like you really thought about marketability and what these characters look like, and you change the way the woman looks, like from early to later.
And, not as much as you
really.
Not as much as you think.
Because I'm wondering where like the art and commerce and compromising to meet expectations, where you guys fall in that.
Well, obviously,
that's a big question.
Creative people, you want to be as dicked with as little as possible, right? And actually, the beauty of, for me anyway, working with Sony is our relationship as Naughty Dog is we don't really get messed with very much. And
so Sony didn't say give her longer hair. That never happened.
No. I mean, this is the iteration, right? And if you're an open and kind of forthright game studio like Naughty Dog is, people are going to see your work in its iterations, not just in its final state. And early versions of Drake didn't look great. Early versions of Elena didn't look great, but you saw them as they went along. And if people then interpret that as sort of focus testing,
a
lot
of people thought that. Like I don't know if that's just maybe the way journalists look at it now. We're trying to find
bunch of cynical bastards.
trying to find a conspiracy and everything.
I've been called worse.
I wish, like, please get on CBS, NBC, Frontline. Please find the conspiracy.
So
yeah, and it was purely an internal process. I mean, the fact was, we're all very vocal with each other, and we weren't happy with certain things. And believe me, it's a company of 75 people. I'm one of about 5 women there. So we got into some heated discussions about was she hot enough and all this stuff, and, from which I put my hands on my hips and stomped away plenty of times. But it's an internal process. We looked at it and said, we're not getting the hair shaders right. We haven't modeled it right. Start again. But it wasn't focus tested to look like they just stepped out of, Urban Outfitters or something like that, which is, I think, how it got perceived, that it was all very calculated. In fact, it was just what appealed to us.
But no one ever accused Oddworld of looking calculated.
I was saying, how does that compare to
what can you add to that?
Well, I think, it's like, I think focus testing with lack of vision on a product, meaning, so typically the marketing department, the publishing, the financing, whatever end it is that's footing the bill, they want to know, well, is this going to be appealing? So focus testing, if there's not a strong vision on the product, is a way to just sort of guarantee mediocrity, really.
Garnet's applause.
I love that point. I love that point.
Let's look at film,
I think it's
right?
such a good point.
Let's look at, like, everyone goes, I don't think, like with Oddworld, actually, I looked at it and I went, I want to create anti-heroes that are not who you want to be, right? That are just pathetic schmucks. And then let's put them in some circumstances where you don't want to be, and let's elevate them out of it.
Instead of fulfillment fantasy, it's like you don't want to fulfill this fantasy.
But part of it was the belief that, from a purely marketing perspective as well, aside from like the artistic, goal and ideal of it, was that, cutting through. We had come out, and my partner goes back in commercials and stuff and has more Clio awards than anyone in the world. It's sick, right, from the early days of computer graphics. And what they focused on all the time was how to cut through, how to make it different, right? We are in a game business that says, well, how do we make it more like that?
Right.
And we wonder why, like, more people aren't authentically interested in games. We wonder why, the market isn't really changing. We wonder why every year Douglas Lowenstein would go up at CES or DICE or E3 and say, we need to get innovative, and then we can understand all the marketing conditions and all the financing conditions and the escalating retarded costs of developing on a new system, which is just, bozo logic. But all of those things homogenize and normalize and make the products less interesting, quite frankly.
Right.
And we looked at it, but we were coming from, like, how do we make the best 15-second Super Bowl commercial? That was our history, right? Or you got a filmmaker comes in, and he's absolutely demanding, and he's going, this shot needs to be, no one's ever seen it before, this came from my movie, and I'm an auteur. And so you think slightly differently. You don't think, like, what did well and how do we mimic that? You think, where is the audience mind share at, and what are they waiting for that no one's giving them? So part of the funkiness of Oddworld was about creating something that was just so different it would cut through. I mean, that was part of the logic. And having anti-heroes instead of like steroided out guys, having really sort of pathetically weak dudes.
And the irony was for us, if you look at our game, it doesn't actually look like other games out there. Now, you might look at those characters in another context and go, well, they seem pretty generic. But that actually was the design decision, is that we wanted them to look like real people. And they're not in space armor, and they don't have enormous breasts, either one of them.
Right.
And they're not. It's
that one slipped through. Isn't it a requirement now?
That was a huge fight, Lauren. You would not believe it.
Oh, I do.
The conversations. So, that's actually kind of the ironic reaction for me, is when I hear that our characters seem like that if people think they look focus tested, well, then they would have had massive muscles, huge tits, been in space armor, had no hair. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I remember when I saw the trailer for Uncharted, like the last trailer, before it came out, I remember thinking, well, this game looks so mundane, but that's kind of what's cool about it, is if this was a TV show on NBC and you saw this commercial, like a 30-year-old dude wouldn't be embarrassed to buy that game, whereas like if it was something like really fanciful, he might not. But it's interesting because it is almost realistic into a mundane way.
That was actually the risk for us, is to go. I mean, it's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's backwards of what you think.
And we're talking about sort of the same thing that Lauren was talking about, which is that you had this vision for it creatively of this is what these characters need to be. This is what this game needs to look like. And regardless of whether some focus testing group or some outward pressure said, oh, she needs to be this archetype or that archetype, you were able to stick to your guns. Where are we? Like, where do you see us now? Let's have a bigger picture question. Where do you think the game design group is as a whole with regard to being able to push back? The subject came up at DICE. They were talking about there were people who were challenging developers to push back against their publishers more. Are we there yet? How close are we?
No way. I mean,
look at Oddworld Stranger. I mean, that's pushing back big time. I mean, that character. I mean, I just thought that was such a, especially for that time, was it 2-3 years ago? That was so different from what you expected, But it was a little bit more of a relatable character than the other guys. Yeah. But still, it was so. I mean, remember when we went to go watch it?
It was years too soon. Now with the proliferation of furries on the internet, it could have been a multi-million copies.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like those are always sore spots in history, right? Because you go, well, okay, what's the most anticipated game this year? And then let's look at the marketing budget of that. And you go, wait a minute, if this is the most anticipated game, why does it have more marketing and advertising dollars than any other game? I mean, it's a very simple thing, right? What's the most anticipated movie? The one everyone's looking forward to. Well, that's the one that's going to have the biggest marketing campaign. You take away the marketing campaign, you take away the sales. So people oftentimes ask me, they go, why do you think that didn't sell? Why do you think this didn't sell? And I don't have sour grapes on it, but you don't sell shit in today's retail environment if you don't promote.
No, absolutely.
And if you're on an acquisition trail as a publisher and you're trying to figure out how to own a company, then maybe you won't promote its titles that you took on the distribution for. And then maybe you get a better buyout price. And then maybe you're dealing with someone who goes, we don't play that game, and it can backfire like it did in the case of our publisher at that time.
Sent to die.
But I look at it and I go, phrase. The everyone's always trying to copy the hit, right? And then that's never the hit. Let's look at Lord of the Rings as the movie, right? Then we have Golden Compass. Then we have these other ones that are trying to follow and trying to get there, and some of them do really well, right? But no one in their right mind would have financed Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. And in fact, no one in their right mind did finance it.
Well, if you look at New Line now.
Yeah.
Well, what New Line did was they financed that movie as a poison pill to avoid a hostile takeover. Right? Like it's Peter Jackson's trying to sell him 2 movies.
Yeah.
And he's going, so it's and the guy's going, wasn't that a trilogy? He's going, well, yeah, it was. Well, let's make all 3. He tried to make such a huge investment that they couldn't have a hostile takeover. So the corporate sort of dark arts is really what enabled that miracle to get built. It never would have been built through the normal financing sort of checks and balances of Hollywood, sell it to the marketing department. How is this going to go? And then we have something that's extraordinary because it's built out on an island, in the middle of the Pacific, and it's hard to get there, so you're not going to have your executives flying out every day. Kind of like how we did Oddworld. We went to the Central Coast so that they couldn't drive over from LA or San Francisco too easily. It's like, let's hide and build our game there, see what happens.
I think asking developers to push back against publishers, it's crazy, but more and more you're hearing about, developers being snapped up, having their original IP canceled and being put on a licensed product. That's still happening every day.
Yeah. Well, what's happening too is that all the publishers are largely public companies, right, for the most part, and so they have they're answering to their shareholders more than they are their audience.
Yep.
And as a result, they're going, how do we look if we're putting something creative out there and it fails? Do we look dumb? Do we look like some of those bodies on the side of the road that used to be called publishers too? What's the smartest approach for us in this marketplace? And what we see then is they go, what are we financing and do we own the IP? So now they might have found out late in the game. This is why we started a game company, because the game industry at the time did not understand that there was any value in sequels. So if you talk to the game companies, it was like talking to Fox. It was like Lucas talking to Fox in 1974, right? It's like, no, there's no money in licensing. Sure, you can have those rights. That's how it was in games in 1994, right? So we were like, yeah, we were like, that's why we're here. Cool, no money in sequels. Well, 10 years later, they're completely hip to, it's all about brand. We don't want to finance anything that we don't own the IP on, which all of a sudden for the creators, you go, it's a lot less interesting now, because basically when we look at properties that have really been built into something that have huge audiences, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings is great examples, and let's just look from the film dates on, Peter Jackson's version on. It was handled with such care and integrity and non-intuitive thinking for what the mass audience would like. He and his wife working on that script to death, making sure those characters, speaking in languages we don't even understand half the shit they're saying. But it's like, wow, they really believe this shit, And Peter Jackson on the set going, this is not a fantasy movie, this is a period piece, And like, this is not, off the set. You think this is a fantasy we're making? Off this, this is like hardcore.
Those guys got tattoos and shit.
Yeah,
they did.
Faith in the vision, faith in like how they built those weapons and things. So we don't have that when we have a sort of collective idea of what's going to sell, which is largely sort of the today in films, television, and games, it's all pretty much, unless you're coming in at really low budgets, it's all pretty much big hit or nothing, blockbuster weekend or nothing. Right?
You're putting it all on the publisher, but what if the publisher, were to retort that, well, it's because the people out there aren't willing to pay for this thing? What is the actual limiting factor to the creativity? Is it?
Well, you go. If all we're measuring is metrics from history, then we never actually have the algorithm that says this is what's a hit in the future, right? It always has to have someone with some vision, someone with some daring perspective to say, we're going to do something a little different. We believe that. Look at Naughty Dog, right? When in the Crash stuff, they go, we're not going to try and do this. We're going to do very, very specifically this type of gameplay. And everyone's going, well, shouldn't it be free world because it's 3D now, And you're like, yeah, those guys are all dying over there, like horses in the desert with no water. Right? They're shriveling up and dying because they can't figure out how to keep the gamer engaged and tell them where to go. So they focused on a very specific, not necessarily. If you were talking to the guys at Sony back in that day, there wasn't necessarily, while they were building it, they had faith that those guys would come up with something decent, but they had no idea that it was going to be as big as it was. But they stuck to their vision, and at that time, I think vision mattered more, whereas today it's like vision is something where, we were also dealing with publishers back in the day where the guys that were running the show actually built games and had a history of building games. It's kind of like Hollywood back in the 30s or 40s, right? We had these guys, and this is, the moguls, the Jewish moguls of Hollywood. But they were filmmakers. They loved film. And even if they were bankers, but they were running studios, they loved the idea of how film could change the world around them. So you had, Jewish guys building It's a Wonderful Life. That we're trying to build the American dream in the public mind the way they wanted to see America. So they cared so much about what that content was. You go back to Motown, the guys that were doing the labels.
Right.
What kind of music did they care about? What was in it? What wasn't someone else picking up that they knew there had to be an audience for because the music had so much soul? And what's happened is that as companies become public, as they become larger entities, as they become $1 billion a year plus, now the biggest thing they're afraid of is their shareholders, or being delisted, or watching their stocks sit at $1 for 10 years.
From the corporate standpoint.
Yeah, but now those are the guys that are running it. Because the guy that's going to run the company is the guy who can talk to Wall Street. It's not the guy who can talk to the game designers. So you go, a lot of these big publishers, the CEO he ain't going to know who that you guys did a
Right.
deal with.
I mean,
he's talking to Wall Street.
To interject, I think a big part of Nintendo's mammoth success is that their president, Mr. Iwata, he is a game creator, a gamer, and he's like a sweet dude. He talks to everybody. I mean, we've met him, and he cares about games. You actually get that from him.
He reads message boards.
He reads message boards. He reads magazines. But he made games, so he understands games, and it's no surprise that Nintendo owns half the industry.
And now they're what, number 2 entertainment company in the world?
Right.
Yeah.
And they took risks. They did the Blue Ocean thing. They went
they had
after where
vision
nobody
and
else is
faith.
going. Everything you're talking about is what Nintendo went and did.
So let me bring
agreed.
this to a different case point, because in Uncharted, you guys, Naughty Dog has created a franchise starter to me, something that looks to definitely have a great potential future to it. And, hopefully not a spoiler to too many people, but as the character rides off into the sunset, with very classic, traditional, you're excited and you're thinking, wow, I wonder what other adventures this character can have. In the scheme of things like Lauren is talking about, how do you guys feel about the future of the security of the future of Drake and the rest of the cast?
Well, obviously we went into it hoping to build a franchise. I mean, if that sounds kind of pragmatic and cynical, it's not. It's only because there's such a huge investment.
You have to.
Yeah, such a huge investment in your engine and the IP that, if you hit, you really want to be able to keep exploring that, and that's where you kind of get your investment back. But I think. I'm trying to think what's the best way to answer this, but yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I'm jealous of other game developers where I see that they just make one game, and they move on to another one. I mean, I know Tim Schafer does that a lot, and it's.
How about the struggle then of? I mean, you have a new IP.
Mm-hmm.
You're on a new piece of hardware that's still selling into the marketplace very strongly. I mean, we know that not everybody who would like to have a PS3 probably has one. There's still people on the fence.
Sure.
So you don't have that huge install base yet. So it's hard to even document, what is the potential of this franchise?
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, I mean, the response has been pretty good, and our sales have been pretty good considering, being up against that, being on a single platform, and things like that. And certainly, in the black, which is great. And I think now that we're seeing that the installed base of the PS3s is increasing, and the fact that Sony has other ways of extending their franchises beyond just the single platform, we're all excited to just sort of keep exploring and expanding it. And I think the reason we chose the genre we did is because it's purpose built to be expanded upon. That
Right.
you expect there to be continuing adventures. That was definitely a conscious choice. But again, not a cynical one. It was one that was because it was a genre we loved and we're excited about, and that these are based on serials and cliffhangers, and the idea that you're going to see these characters again and they're going to go through other adventures, and that being able to tap into that huge history of the genre is great fun because it's not plagiarism, it's homage. You know what I mean?
Right.
And,
No,
I mean,
absolutely.
Raiders
And-
is an homage to everything came before, and obviously we are too.
As an audience member, I gain more buy-in just thinking, wow, you know what? This is something where I expect to see the character down the road. So I want to learn more about Drake because that way I know his background when I'm in his next adventure or in his third adventure. And I understand where he's been and who he is and what his context is. I get all that stuff.
Yeah, the trick, of course, is to not fall into the trap.
What? Come in.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, just the other side of that is Tomb Raider and what happened with Lara Croft. That
Right.
was rather than wanting another one, it got to the point where we wanted her to have a vacation for some time. And then
Yeah, but I also think about a lot of that is A, the quality went down, and B, they were just shoving them out every year. I mean, like
That's the problem.
I think
the every
that's
year
the-
thing. I mean, that's
Right.
just too
The-
The
frequent.
thing, though, is it's just that Tomb Raider, for many gamers, and I think many PlayStation 3 owners and potential players of Drake, that is part of what's in their mind as much as the tradition of of the serial and the cliffhanger ending and traditional.
And look,
cinema.
look at it at a more macro level too, right? It has the brand Naughty Dog on it.
Right.
So this is one of the things that Sony, is being smart about, is not extinguishing a very visible quality brand label to the gamers, right? So anything that you guys come up with, the audience is going to be curious about, no matter what, because they have a history of totally solid games that become franchises and drive sales for hardware.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can tell that because
Yeah,
when the
yeah.
game was first shown, it had no title. It was just you saw the Naughty Dog.
Well, that wasn't by choice.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, it was.
It's a whole
proven
other
that- but
story.
it was proven that
But
that
it's
was
true.
that was
Yeah, I mean,
important.
Crash and Jack are like bellwether franchises with really loyal fan bases. That
Because I know,
stick with them.
because I know for me, if I just seen that trailer and didn't see the Naughty Dog, logo, I may be a little bit more pessimistic. That's true.
And that's
for me.
And that actually gives Naughty Dog a lot of strength in saying we want to do something different. Right, so they have a track record of saying, okay, here's these franchises that really stand out in the history of gaming, right, in their success and in their audience reception. And then you go, yeah, but we want to make this more, Indiana Jones, cliffhanger-ish, and it's more human-looking, and they're not as extreme as our other characters and all. Now, most developers would have a harder time selling that.
Right, absolutely. We've been hugely fortunate in terms of how our working relationship with Sony, and I feel a little bit insulated in the sense that answering some of the questions you're just talking about where, how is it for developers working with publishers and can you push back? And I'm just thinking, well, we don't ever have to push at all. It just seems like it goes pretty smoothly if we're all making rational, creative choices. But I know that that's not the usual experience.
And you guys are interfacing with like Shu Yoshida and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is a really important point. Is that Shu? I'm a big fan of Shu's because here's a guy. He was like Ed Freeze in a lot of ways. They both really cared about games. They both really wanted to see games go into new directions, and they both were very. In a sense, fiercely protective of what they believed were the creative talents capable of actually delivering those games. But they have so much history, so much passion, so much love for the medium. Now we can go to other companies where someone just came over and now they're the president of this company from Procter & Gamble. Right? How much vision do you think that person's going to have when it comes to backing creative vision and passion on a new title that doesn't have a statistical history of this genre or something really selling?
I remember many years ago I was at a party with one of the chief financial officers of one company. He said it's okay to make a Camry, a lot of Camrys. We don't have to make this. We don't have to make the Cadillac. We can make these budget games. That's okay. Like it was all about dollars and cents for them.
In terms of publishers pushing back, I have to ask: the Sobe drink placement in Munch was that Microsoft or was that something you guys?
Oh, you lost your mic some.
It was.
Sorry. Trying to dodge the question there, Lauren. About the awesome Sobe machines.
Grab Lauren's feet, drag him back through the door.
Yeah. Just curious about that one because that was a pretty early in-game advertising thing, actually.
Yeah.
Now it's commonplace.
We were actually all for it because what happens is you're building really expensive games and your ass is fully out on the line.
It's like, you'll give us money? Sure.
Yeah. Our hero's this dude in a wheelchair. This is going to go over real well.
You're remembered to be huge among the handicapped.
This was actually the first time you met the CEO of Procter & Gamble.
Yeah, so, people are like, I don't know. And you're like, no, man, come on. Shrek as a game, right? As a game. Let's say now I'm proposing a title and there's Shrek. He's a big, ugly ogre. Right? What focus testing is going to say, yeah, that's going to win? But if you launch it as a movie, it could be huge. So, like I felt that Abe and Stranger and things like that were actually far more mass market characters. But the games medium is not really mass market yet. As long as we'd like to think it is, it's not. Because mass market is like Pixar, right? And you can have a Monsters, Inc. where Billy Crystal's voice has one eyeball, and it's just like, it's not going to fly in the game industry before it gets to the audience. I believe it absolutely could when it hits the audience.
Right.
But it depends on, a lot of factors. And so
I think we were up against that a little bit, again, or ironically, with Uncharted, is because it was sort of unexpected. And that's what listening to you guys talk about this, I wonder how fair it is to lay everything at the feet of the publisher. I think developers have to own up to the fact that we have to bring more innovative ideas to the table. And I think sometimes there's a lack of creativity even within the development community. And I think the media, no offense, is responsible, and I think the fans are responsible.
Well, that's where that focus testing thing kicks in, right? My reason I was applauding is that having seen games is that I want a creative person to have such a strong spark for a game that when I sit down and play it, it comes across and I feel it and I go through the whole game feeling it. And I don't need focus testing to get that, and they probably don't need. You know what they need focus testing to get? They need focus testing to help them figure out how to lay the controls across the control pad.
Right, absolutely.
And how to do the HUD.
We don't focus. When we say we focus test religiously, it's gameplay focus testing. Absolutely. It's after the concept phase. We don't lay pictures down on a table in front of 14-year-olds and get them to vet it. I mean,
right.
That would be stupid.
But there are cases of that happening all over the industry, right?
Yeah.
Where they're saying, this is what this character should look like.
We see games all the time that you just can tell, okay, like this,
this is
based on this.
But I feel like we have to push back ourselves against this. I mean, God bless him, I love him, so I'm not criticizing him here. But like Dave Halverson, his preview of Uncharted, he was basically like, wow, this game's beautiful, it looks interesting, but ditch this guy, ditch the main character. He was saying, he needs something. Why is he so generic? I'm thinking, what do you want, a top hat and a monocle? I mean, it's like saying, it's like to me, it's what you're talking about, Lauren. I mean, it's like looking at Kiefer Sutherland saying in 24 and saying, well, it's great, but he needs some sort of costume. I mean, why do we have to do that in our genre? Now, to Dave's credit or whatever, I thank him for this. He wrote a glowing review of the final game and sort of said, my God, I take it back. I thought he was generic, and within 20 minutes I fell in love. I thought he was the next Indiana Jones. And that's what I'm hoping we can do in our industry, is get over that hump of having to be caricatures to be able to attract any attention, or to be the same as some other games. I flip through these gaming magazines and I swear my brain just goes to sleep because I just feel like I'm seeing the same thing page.
It's funny, we were just noticing, like Sam Fisher, star of Splinter Cell, he got like a beard, looks all kind of rough now.
There's 4 games now. They're all
I was looking through a game
hair,
and everyone
beard.
looks like scruffy Sam Fisher. I was like, is it like that the new look? I
Well,
guess it
that's what I'm
is.
saying. Do you think that's coming from the publishers, or do you think the developers are just not being very imaginative? I sometimes wonder whether
I think what's happening is we kind of have a polluted cycle that's stifling itself, and like when we see things like Club Penguin, right? It really says, you know what, guys? You don't know what the hell you're doing.
Well,
The whole industry, right? It's just YouTube. We see these things happening. The writer's strike right now. The huge mistake that the studios and the networks are making with the writer's strike is, last time there was a writer's strike, they go, hey, we can hold out. They'll all come back. Well, this time they got other things to do. So before, we didn't have iTunes playing our TV shows, our movies. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have these things. So now their shows are being canceled. Their shows are been delayed. And like Sherry, a total fan, there's 13 shows she's not recording this year, right? They're not going back. That's the sort of beauty of the greed factor imploding on itself. As you go, statistically, you're saying the last time we had a writer's strike, 1987, we have a slump. We'll beat up the writers. We'll have them take less. We'll take everything. And they'll have nowhere else to go. And then the market will come back. Well, now the market's not going to come back. It has too many choices. And things like Club Penguin are a beautiful example of this, right? Where everyone's kid was in there. And meanwhile, the game industry is saying, well, there's no market in kids.
Right? Miss.
Like, how to look stupid in the game industry. Right? And so what we have, which is really, here's a great example. You talk to the filmmakers, and they're really frustrated because they don't get to own their IPs. No matter who.
Right.
You name them except for George, they don't own their IPs. And so they're trying. That's why John Woo's constantly trying to do comic books or games. So they're trying to own IPs. They're trying desperately because they hate the studios. Right? They just you don't know what they put me through in that last film. Then you get the publishers talk to the directors, because the directors want to make games, and the directors walk out of the room and go, I will never, ever work with those people. I mean, how many times we've heard this? It's like big name directors. It's just like, how do these game guys do it? But what's happening is the game guys, the game design people, are being so sort of conditioned by how to properly respond to the publishers that they also are having a super hard time communicating to the other talents in other industries. Right? Music, it's easier. You talk to someone like Nile Rodgers or something doing the music. I mean, talk about convergence. That guy's a god in music history, I mean, at unprecedented levels. And then he's like, no, man, I want to get young artists like totally into the games, man. But they're intimidated, So he's like bridging that gap. Wow. But you don't have that happen with filmmakers. Filmmakers don't want to have the discipline to really understand how hard games are.
They want the money. Like, Gore Verbinski at DICE was giving the keynote about, I want to get into games because he saw how Disney mishandled Pirates. And he's like, well, I could have done it better, but,
Yeah, welcome
so here's how you say that.
You say that, but come on.
Before we get to a point where we're out of time and I'll get to this, is another big question I wanted to get while I have two folks who've handled this very well in their games, is how do you balance out the need for a game to have character interaction, for you to be doing things in the game and feel like you're, like you're influencing what's happening, but the basic nature of a story has a beginning and a linear path and then an ending. How do you balance that and make it work? Because both of you guys have succeeded in that.
Well,
it's a bitch.
It's really hard. I mean, I'm convinced now, and this sounds arrogant, I guess, and it's not. I think making games is way harder than making movies. And it's funny, I ran into Jason Rubin not too long ago, and now that he's branched into other media, he goes, oh my God, if you can do this, you can do anything.
Absolutely.
And, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, when you storyboarded out Uncharted, for instance, how did you determine? Well, this is where a character can have free reign to do things, but this is where I need to bring him back to the story.
Yeah, it's. Sorry. Go ahead, Lauren, because I'm going to.
Well, it's interesting. Like, in many ways, we're talking about how does ramping work with narrative, and I remember on Stranger we started putting together new types of charts, and because it was like the science was too pseudo, it was too voodoo, and you're sitting there at the end making all these decisions, and you had someone like me in the studio going, it's not working. And then you got a producer going, yeah, well, it's done. And you're going, no. No, because if it doesn't work, it's not done, because then we're done. Yeah. Meaning we'll be through. It's got to be great for the audience. That's who matters at the end. And our publisher might be pissed for different reasons that we should have buttoned down on this button, but no, we are leaving it open. We're going to fix that. And I think a lot of the challenge becomes like, how is the inherent nature of who the character is related to the play? Now, this is something like for Oddworld, like for Abe, I look at these characters and go, what do they as characters have that's very special that can give them unique game mechanics that don't come with other characters? So Abe was like, he's kind of a wuss, right? But his sneak became very, very important, right? His possession, like, well, how do you do a game where people want to kill shit, but a guy never is going to carry a gun or a weapon? So we created possession out of making sure that the character didn't have a gun that he carried, but you could have one, but when you lost it, it didn't feel like it got taken away. Like, these were really, actually very hard design problems. And I sort of look at these design problems like, really, what people might consider sometimes brilliant solutions really come not from genius, but from figuring out how to create a really difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, and I think to your question, how do you create something that makes the player feel empowered? But when you're essentially telling a linear story to tell it powerfully, I think both Lauren and I would say, you just go for it and tell your linear story, but make it good.
Figure it out. Yeah, figure out exactly what that story is. Maybe there's a couple deviations, but don't try and get into. James Cameron said it years ago because they were saying interactive movies, superhighway. What's going to happen? And he goes, look, man, one budget, one ending, hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Same budget, 50 endings, forget it. It's all going to be crap.
Yeah, and I admire the people that are experimenting with, telling stories in games without cutscenes, or trying to have branching storylines or completely open game worlds, but I think it's a different beast than traditional storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I actually get a little upset and frustrated when I hear people act like it's, we're approaching the death of the single-player game or the linear storytelling experience, because to me, I think it's a very powerful, when done well, enjoyable experience for the player. And that was really our goal of Uncharted, is to try to overcome that problem. And I think what you do is you give the player creativity and choice within constraints. It's something we kind of call shorthand inside our company wide linear. I'm sure other people have used the same term. You don't have to have a sandbox, because that actually can be, ironically, almost paralyzing to the player, I think, that they can do anything and go anywhere. And it's certainly hard to tell a powerful story that has the right movements and pacing with that. You just give them enough freedom that they feel like they're making meaningful choices within that path. So I think it comes down to quality. If somebody wants to tell me a linear story but it's crap, yeah, I'm going to resent it. But if you really try to apply everything that we've learned from watching good movies, then I think the player will go along with you, as long as, again, that you get the pacing right.
I totally agree with that. And it's like we were building charts at the beginning of Stranger, and I was like, what is the mechanics that are going to ramp in? Like, what would constitute that really big payoff? And so we built a game where it's he has it disguised, but you don't even know it. So there's all this like bounty collecting money and stuff like that. And we got to a certain point that's going to get tedious. So let's just shatter what you think that's going to become and take it all away, and then just go Halo 2, for the last act. Just go balls out. No more of that game. You're busted now. Survive. And there's a lot of lessons learned in that. There's, you could have done some things smarter, but when you look at it as a story, you go, at what point? What's this character's arc? At what point is this character dealing with his emotional issues? At what point is he dealing with, letting go of the old, accepting the new, embracing who he really is, like you would in a movie? And then you go, okay, now how does the mechanic delivery, okay, now I've been playing, now I should get a new thing, I should be offered a new challenge. How does that parallel the narrative. Right. And I think therein lies what I really call sort of narrative game design is mastery of compromise. It's not like dazzlingly brilliant. It's mastering compromise. And this is where the filmmakers have a really hard time because they don't get how hard games are and how limiting it is in terms of what your creative abilities are.
And how much you have to change stuff right in the middle and pull it all apart and put it back together
and
again.
And how brutal and costly that process is.
Yeah, and just how creatively flexible you have to be all the time.
So see, that's great. You know what? She just to comment, she just touched on a really critical part. And there's a lot of, I mean, the majority of games get released are pretty crappy. It doesn't mean that people who were built them were crappy. It just means that somehow it got pushed out before it was due, or somehow it got greenlit when it shouldn't have.
And no one goes in wanting to make a crappy game, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So with all those things in mind, either of you want to go out with a little tease for your fans or anything upcoming? Any ideas, any thoughts, just a little, one-liner?
Obviously we're continuing to plow forward with our next project, but it's nothing I can talk about publicly.
Yeah, I hate to say the same, All I'd say is our leaders are waging war irresponsibly for personal gain. I think the users should be able to too.
So I want to get one question. While we have Lauren, we were talking about linear stories and since the Quintology was initially announced, 4 games ended up coming out. Only 2 official Quintology. Is that overall story still within you? Is it still going to be told?
Absolutely.
Have you abandoned that?
Absolutely not. No. But telling it as game first, the market conditions of the industry have changed so much that to sit down with what I envisioned the Quintology to be and now have it filtered through the focus testing departments and stuff, which is largely the only way you get games made today, unless you have the success record that they do. We don't, We had a lot of visibility, a lot of great things happen. We're very blessed, but we're not Naughty Dog with 40 million games out there in sales, So when we look at what can happen, it's like I want to deliver them as narrative, as linear first with game components. But what happened with Munch, which was all our fault, it was like a huge challenge for me, was that the story I wanted to tell versus the one I could tell through the technology was completely polar. And so all of a sudden I go, wow, I had this epic that I wanted to do narratively, and it just got screwed on the second one because of the technology challenges and our own, mistakes and errors and learning the hard way.
And it's really hard not to just keep carrying those mistakes forward as baggage. We definitely had to deal with that at Crystal Dynamics, and mistakes made along the way that we couldn't just somehow fix and rectify and undo, that we kind of had to keep living with them, and that's hard, especially when it spans multiple projects.
But you said something earlier which I just want to comment on, which is the ability to go in and know you need to break it, fix it, and change it. That's the difference between what makes great games and the ones that aren't great. Yeah. Because when you have producers that are going, it's too bad, here's our schedule, you don't get to fix that, you get a mediocre game.
Right. And this is something we talk about all the time, and actually one of our GDC talks is going to cover this as well, is without sounding pejorative, we don't have producers in-house. We have producers at Sony who are very helpful in facilitating everything for us and making sure we have what we need, but we do things that most developers or publishers would think would be insane in terms of tearing things apart and doing them over again at the very last minute and adding things at the very last minute. Lauren's got to go.
I do that as well, but I do have to go.
Lauren's got to. Hey, much appreciate you coming on.
Oh,
thank you very much.
Amy,
nice to see you again.
And for anyone listening out there, if Oddworld Stranger is sitting on your, don't forget to take off the headset before you walk away.
I was going to take the whole headset.
If Oddworld Stranger is sitting on your pile of shame, don't let it sit there any longer. You really should play that. I actually loved that game.
Is it your favorite Western game?
Well,
I would say it's one of mine.
Well, and the twist is.
I know the twist.
Good. The twist is really good. I won't. There's not enough people who played it. You should play it. And the guns.
Revealed prior to the game's release.
I think you're right.
Yeah, but there's enough people who didn't play it. They won't remember it.
This?
Yeah.
That was revealed in preview.
Thanks, Lauren.
Bye.
All right, and so there you go.
Like a whirlwind, Lauren.
I know, the whirlwind tour has come and
He's like
gone.
a force of nature. He comes in and out like a hurricane.
See, I got to develop that kind of style.
Yeah.
There's so many things to ask him, too. I never got the chance to. But, of course, during all that talk about putting all the blame on the publishers, which certainly some
is that how it came out?
Some is due, but it doesn't explain Psychonauts and Okami and Oddworld Stranger and
it totally
Eco
doesn't.
and all these other great games.
Doesn't explain
BioShock. Killer 7, where people did take well, I'm naming games that did have an artistic or creative vision, were unique in various ways, but didn't deliver sales. Right, BioShock is sold phenomenally.
Sometimes I think you could blame the publisher. A lot of times you can blame the publisher for not having the courage, after paying all the development costs, to actually go the whole way and pay to market the thing too, and put their faith behind it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
his
that people get
experience-
cold feet at the last minute,
Right.
And which is bizarre
Yeah.
because they'll spend the bulk of their money on the development. Marketing's expensive, so not to sort of underestimate that, but it's always ironic to me when I see a game that seems like it could have succeeded with a little bit more marketing spend, or a little bit more. Lack of faith is palpable, I think, to your audience from the publisher.
Sure.
And that makes them shy away and wait, and maybe that game never gets a chance to get the word of mouth it needs. But it does make me wonder sometimes. That's what I was saying earlier. Whether is our medium matured enough, or will it ever be what I hope it is, where the audience wants a lot of variety and uniqueness and quirkiness, or we see the same games doing extremely well over and over again, whether they're big space operas or sci-fi or swords and sorcery epics and things like that. And I don't know, maybe the little games.
I feel like it's gotten better and worse.
Well, if you look at other media, it's frightening to me because I don't know if it's a sign of the immaturity of this industry, but if you look at books, right, bestsellers, there was like a 5-year span where it was Chicken Soup for the Soul, Volume 1 through whatever.
Walmart still affects the bestsellers list, and what kind of books get published,
and music and movies and all these categories. I mean, very oftentimes we're so used to knowing that the very best is never the bestseller sometimes, but when it is, it's a rare cause for celebration. That it's like, I don't know, I think weren't we kind of used to that, right? You don't expect your favorite band to be the number one selling thing.
It's the same reason, you look at the Oscars, the movies that are nominated for Best Picture, they're rarely not always the best, the ones that made the most money that at a box office.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to bring this up with Lauren, but like in 1996, when like Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen, and the first Oddworld game came out for PlayStation, they were both like grassroots, like cult hits that became like million sellers slowly. They had legs. I was working at retail at the time. I remember those games coming to prominence and being surprised. Like, these things aren't IPs. There aren't. No one knows what these are, and they're weird. Like, and they're becoming successful.
I call them word of mouth games.
But like, it feels like these days, because everything's more AAA oriented in the boxed copy, release world, not the PSN or LA world.
And that's very much it. We're talking AAA.
It seems less likely for a game like Oddworld or Blood Omen to happen now in the same way.
And
if a game like Uncharted, we have to, like, the press has to keep reminding people, oh, this game's great, like, even though you've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Which is like taking the analogy and saying that we're looking at film, but films that are only like 300 million and more or whatever to make, and then there's we're taking out all the stuff from Cannes and Sundance and all that,
Yeah, and that's why it's so cutthroat. A few games get so much marketing that like you get bombarded with that, but you don't see like the lion's share of these smaller games that are even being released. I think it might have gotten worse in the last 10 years.
I think what you said right is it's gotten somewhat better, and then sometimes it's worse.
Yeah, I think PSN and Xbox Live Arcade and WiiWare, which is here at GDC, that is a future channel for that. And what do you think of that? And what do you think of these new delivery methods? I mean, Naughty Dog hasn't announced anything for PSN, but
yeah, well, I mean, it's still sort of a developing idea and infrastructure, right? But what's exciting to me more as a gamer than maybe as a game developer is the idea that it's democratizing, and that we're going to see a lot more small games out of people who have very maybe clever ideas that would never see the light of day otherwise.
We've already seen some.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that that's just going to continue. At this point, I think infrastructure-wise, you're not going to see games the size of an Uncharted as downloadable, right? So, I mean, even in episodic content, I mean, the time and space on a hard drive that it takes to download a demo for a game like ours means that to download an entire game of any sort of length that would not take less time to play than it would to download. We're still a ways off from that.
Right.
But that's going to help, even with the type of games we make, that we can start seeing things being more episodic. I'm glad to see it, because we certainly had a much lower point, I think, a few years ago, where it really felt like things were very homogenized, and we're actually starting to see some more creativity.
Like the everyday shooters and the pixel junks. I think more of those, the better.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't seeing anything like that for a while. I mean, we were talking about it back at Crystal, and thinking, well, there's no distribution model for this stuff, and can you do something like, could you put something in a cardboard sleeve and put it on the counter of a game store? And you can't still, because at a certain point the cost of goods is just going to outweigh or the retailer's interest in such a thing.
That's how you should sell Uncharted 2. Cardboard, piece of shirt cardboard, and a little Ziploc bag. just drop the Blu-ray in there. What do you think? That'll work, Jen? She's all like, yeah.
I wanted to know if you'd created any characters outside of a video game context, specifically because, if you look again at other media where you tell stories to an audience, whereas with gaming, you tell a story with an audience, and how that, experience of creating a character differs for you when you know that it is going to be a collaborative act, when you're not going to tell a person everything about themselves and everything they do, but you're going to allow some room for them to develop and fill that role on their own and create their own character.
Well, I've been in this business for almost 20 years now, so that's kind of been my creative life, to be honest. Before that, I was in college and grad school briefly, but I don't know if I would do things any differently. Obviously, even if you're writing a book or you're making a movie, the whole point is to leave the audience enough room to participate through inference. Right? You don't want to just, everything shouldn't be cut and dried. And I think the same thing just applies to characters in games, right? And that's what lets them be invested, is just not telling everything about the character.
See, that's why I like the Dreams in Lost Odyssey.
Well, that's why I think, I've said this before.
I can't believe you just brought that up.
Amy, I'm curious, have you heard about these?
But it was the same point. It was the same point because it allows my imagination to get involved in it, and that's what you're talking about, right?
This is why Eco and Shadow are so powerful, right? The Eco and Shadow of the Colossus.
Yes.
Everybody says, why are these games, granted, maybe they haven't been blockbusters, but why are they so effective? And when people say, what's the best story game you ever played, those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
There's almost no character there.
And it's because it's all for you to interpret.
It's visual, it's emotions.
And that's more emotional in the same way, and this sounds all heady and silly, but it's the same way poetry is more moving in some ways than just some sort of, dime store novel, because I'm interpreting it and therefore I'm bringing myself to it. And I think even if you're trying to make a mainstream game, there's still room to do that and not just have everything be sort of cut and dried. Leaving enough in the dialogue for the player to sort of interpret.
I like the way she explains it way more than you.
Dude, I'm not a creative director either. I'm a journalist, remember? That's why she makes excellent games, and I just write about them.
But I think Garnett's way more articulate than that I am. I heard him say what he said earlier. It was very wise.
With a game, in addition to inferring
the check
things.
I'll just go upstairs and write it. You won't even have to wait for the mail.
Sweet.
Listen, with a game, in addition to inferring things on top of the characters, you're also able to act and behave, though, and so potentially to behave in ways that are contrary to whatever it is that the developers is setting up to be in the person's character, so...
Yeah, and it's interesting, it kind of goes back to a question you asked earlier, too, about, or maybe you did, about storytelling, or maybe it was you, storytelling in games, and, how do you do this? I guess I was saying, certain people seem to be pushing for completely interactive storytelling, as if that's the holy grail, and I don't agree with that. I think that's fine in some situations, but when that implies that those of us still trying to tell traditional narratives are somehow backward, I get offended.
Well, do you think a user-defined, immersive, emergent narrative could ever be as compelling as one you wrote? That's the question.
Well, I think there's just certain things you can't do that way. So, I look at, and these are brilliant games, so I'm not criticizing them, but I look at things like, Half-Life, or some of the stuff in, say, Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, where they're trying to leave the control in the player's hands as much as possible, which is awesome. We want to do that, too. But they're doing it at times when I wouldn't choose to do it. You leave the player just enough control to make the game look stupid, and I can look around. Okay, well, I'm going to look the wrong way then. Or
right.
I can walk around while they're talking to me. Okay, well, I'll walk in this corner and jump up and down a bunch of times. Or, in Assassin's Creed, okay, I'll pace back and forth and keep changing the camera view. And I find when I'm doing that, just because I can, doesn't mean I should, but as a player, I'm going to do anything you allow me to do, and I'm not listening to what's happening in the narrative at the time, or I'm in Half-Life, picking up a cannon and throwing it at a guy's head while he's talking to me to see what'll happen, So I just don't know whether that's really, you're going to tell the most effective story that way.
So let me pull Sean in for a second, because remember last week we were talking about cutscenes versus...
Yeah, I think that's what made me think of it.
Yeah,
right.
I think it was coming, you might be responding to some of the things I said, and part of it is just the notion that for me, I'm almost always perceive cutscenes as being entirely divorced from my experience. So when I go back and I look in retrospect, what do I remember about this game? In games with cutscenes, I remember playing the game, and I always forget about the cutscenes, often to the point where, like with Halo 3, about halfway through the game, I began skipping. I'm no longer... But just because I can't connect the two. And it seems on one level, I think as people in the games industry, we always want to say it. We have all this potential in the world. We could tell the greatest stories. But I do, when I sit there and like this morning on my way to work, I ask myself, do I really think that games can tell stories that are on the level of, and granted, the head start that other media have, especially literature has got, so many centuries, but even, cinema and stuff. And I'm just like, there's nothing. When you really want to go no holds barred and compare the finest narrative that game has to offer now, and again, taking that head start into consideration, there's no contest at all in my mind.
Oh no, absolutely. I don't
contest
think you
at all.
can compare the best of games and the best of, say, film or the best of books. I don't think we're there yet. We're still embryonic, right? But do you think it's the nature of the medium, and we're just doomed?
And
or
that's
do you
why.
think
No, I just think. Or
is it just the quality of the people creating those narratives?
I think it's also
question the extent to which gaming is a medium that should be about telling stories in the traditional sense, and it all comes back to that interactive thing where I think, well, should you be trying to tell? Do you really want to make a movie, or do you want to make a game?
Well, I don't know. It's so funny though, because when I hear those things, why do we have to limit ourselves and say no? Games are this. Well, look, if I want to make a game like Uncharted and people want to buy it, it's valid, right?
Right. It's certainly. I mean, it certainly is. But again, for me, it'd be like, say I'm watching a movie, and then all of a sudden, every 30 minutes it interrupts, and then it scrolls not just a Star Wars text scroll, but it gives me a good 15,000 words, and then another half an hour, and then it does it again, and another half an hour. Then it seems to me that they're saying, well, rather than invent some language that's native to this medium that we're working in now, being cinema in this analogy, we're going to just draw on solutions that people have devised for other formats that worked well there, and that are increasingly proving like how insufficiently suited they are to the format at hand. For people like me that look at it and they're like, okay, here comes 15,000 words of text. I thought I was watching a movie. Likewise for me, it's like, here comes 10 minutes of movie. I thought I was playing a game.
To me, when I hear you talk, Sean, I feel like you feel like too many developers and publishers are relying on what they've learned from literature and movies, and that you want to see them just try different aspects of telling a narrative in a video game, completely different, not like trying something completely different. Because like, I just feel like your expectations are the same exact what you get from a movie and books. But I think even if you're comparing books to movies, there's different expectations where you're getting out of the narrative.
Well, that's why I don't want to see games try to. I mean, that's really what it's about. For one, I should clarify, this is not like some hard and fast rule. Well, oh, I can't like this game, it's got a cutscene. I'm just saying generally.
Sometimes I feel like that's what you're saying.
In a perfect world, most of the time it doesn't really matter. A Metal Gear might really push the limit because it goes on.
See,
so
my
long.
argument last week that you didn't really answer was, I think that the cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid 3 are really well-directed films.
I agree.
Completely.
I think they're
well-directed, well-written,
poorly acted, poorly written, and poorly...
I mean, if you're I think the problem is
they're pretentious G.I. Joe cartoons.
I think the problem...
This weekend, for your benefit...
I know, I saw you doing that. That's a terrible
Sean,
comparison.
If you take those things out of context, they're going to seem silly to you, but I think the problem with you is the rubric you have is high art, and you expect games, like the narrative and the presentation in games, to be like the high art literature and film you watch. And that's a really hard comparison.
I don't expect them to do that at all. I want them to be games. I want the game. It's fine.
Right.
Hey, if it's a game like, when N'Guy was talking about The Club, that could be in and of itself all that you need. It's just the game is what's speaking to me. The part that I'm playing and the extent that I'm interacting with the world and doing things, that's the part that's fine with me. So that's why at the same time I'm like, hey, I'm playing We Degree, I'm playing all these other things. It's like it doesn't even matter.
But it's almost like you don't want it's almost like you don't want narrative in your game.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. That's what it sounds like though.
Okay, to get it back to Amy, but just to say this, that, like,
I'll never
it's
get
not
in here.
that I don't want.
He doesn't want your narrative.
If you look at the history of various art forms and stuff, I don't even really mean to use of entertainment. Don't even want to use the A word. People just eventually find ways to really get going and just go on a tear in whatever format they're using. And that sort of thing takes time. And if you also look at the beginning, whenever there's the inception of a new art form, people start off very literally, like the very earliest films were just stage plays with the camera that just stay
Exactly.
there all the time, and that's an insecurity, I think. And it's not like, and if I was a film critic in that era, it wouldn't be that I was waiting for Citizen Kane. It could have been like some Buster Keaton or something. It could have been any random popcorn thing. But as long as it wasn't just let's set up a camera and everyone just act and we'll do a single take and we'll see how.
I totally get what you're saying. Actually, maybe more than these guys do.
I know, right? That's good to hear.
But what you're saying, if I'm interpreting you right, is that you don't want people just to fall back on the modes of storytelling that they're familiar with and not try to push what maybe the medium should do in the same way that film needed to push and move the camera around and all that kind of stuff.
And don't try to be those other mediums. Try to be a game.
I can understand that.
Try to make games,
I can understand
not to make movies,
but
not to make books.
But when our medium, in its current limitations, fails in that regard to be moving or engaging or communicate something, we might have to fall back on those things because unlike that's not true. I was going to say unlike film at the time, but I mean, some of those cameras were pretty heavy. They couldn't move them around. I mean, we're limited somewhat by some of the things we can do.
Absolutely.
Sean, having thought about this for a week, let me take the torch for a moment here, which is this. I care about those, and I thought about why I cared about them. It's because by virtue of playing the game for the other portion, 60, 70, 80, whatever percent of the game, I've built a different sort of relationship with the characters than I do when I'm just sitting there statically on my couch watching a movie. Because there, I don't have any interaction with the characters. I haven't played, but in playing a game, I'm in the environment. I'm in the world with them. And so then when I want to see the story advance faster than it's going to advance with me there's no way for the game to have me do what I need to do to advance the story all the time. There are certain things that need to happen, transpire as events that push the story along, right? So I want to see those. I want to see what happens because I built the relationship with the characters. Does that make sense?
I know. Sometimes I just want to sit back, relax, and watch it happen, man. Like after playing for an hour and a half or 2 hours of some really intense gameplay. If something's cool going to happen or some big, narrative twist, sometimes I just want to sit back, relax, and watch it unfold.
Just to point it back, though, for I guess my closing statement of the debate would be to remind you that we were talking about how the power of eco, right, and how it's really just a blank canvas for you to paint your own, interpretation on.
But all
and then
games
also,
can't
likewise,
be
to
that.
ask you, like, who you cared about more, Alex Vance from the Half-Life series, again, the girl from Eco, or in Metal Gear Solid 3. What's her name?
The boss.
Yeah, when she dies. I mean, who's?
Oh, see, I'm the boss. I would definitely.
So it is a personal
but you
thing
see,
then.
Yeah, and also the thing is, I think
there will be a wide variety
I feel like what I hear
of
you talk about,
responses.
you feel like there's not room for both, and I'm saying there is room for the ecos where you can kind of more interpret what you want, and there's like the big blockbuster. You just want to see it unfold. They're gonna throw it right in your face.
I think
those
it'll
are my
be looked
favorite
at as-
games. Right, Eco Wood Shadow. If I could have told Uncharted story that way, I would have had us do it. But they're apples and oranges.
Yeah.
And in the same way that there are poems and novels and adventure books and there's room for all of it. And I think then it comes down to quality, right? Because if you're gonna try to tell things with a traditional narrative, just do it well then as much as you can. And the reason we use cutscenes is when we need the characters to be physically in contact with each other, or we need to be able to express emotion and to push the narrative along, or we need to see something in close up, or we really need the player to see what's playing out, giving them control during that just doesn't work. It eliminates the quality of the emotional experience that we can convey to the player at that point. And rather than tell a story then that is then more about inference through action and maybe is a little bit emotionally limited, I'd rather rely on some of the things that we've learned from film and tell a more emotionally engaging story until our medium has the power, and I'm not sure it ever will, but until technically we have the power to do some of the things that we're able to do when we take the control away.
I have a closing statement. I think Amy was getting to the point that gaming technology has come a long way in 35 years.
Trying to wrap this up, aren't you?
And wrapping it up, and the way you can tell a narrative now versus in 1972, huge advancements. And to say that gaming is still like the Nickelodeon, or you're shooting a horse running or whatever, we've come a long way, and it's not the infancy of gaming. Part two, I think if you're going to choose a game to go after for cutscenes, Metal Gear is not the one. Narratively, it's the most ambitious and daring and postmodern, and does crazy fucked up things. Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3 that that no other game has ever done with narrative. I could
Says the great Metal Gear fan.
But no, but like everyone would agree, like the things it does breaks the fourth wall, very postmodern, crazy, and
that's not for everybody. And that's not for everybody.
Not
I'm not
for
saying
everybody.
it, but as a fan, I've come to enjoy it.
We're almost over here, but Amy, I do think at the end of Uncharted,
Here it comes.
Elena suddenly becomes damsel in distress after being a really strong
Here we
female
go.
character.
He's been waiting for this
with her
all
own
day.
Okay, before you go to that part,
With her
then,
own-
as long as we're breaking stuff, why the hell does Elena let the goddamn camera go away and be
because
forgotten
she
about?
cares more about her own life.
I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that decision after so much time of holding onto the camera and it being so important to her. Then when she drops it, it's gone, it breaks. She doesn't even try to go in and get the tape. It's like, oh, screw the camera.
Well, mainly because it was really a pain to keep that camera around in game. I'll tell you, that's
She
why.
holds it above water. I was very impressed.
Oh, well, the thing would have been completely destroyed, even though it was a Sony. It would have been completely destroyed.
It's a very strong camera.
But I think we could have done that cutscene a little bit better. In the sense that to make the choice a little bit more obvious that there was nothing she could do at that point, and it didn't quite come out the way we wanted. And sometimes you just got to roll forward, and you can't really do anything about it. Honestly, it was a huge part of the pragmatic decision in the storytelling.
I was so mad at her. I was so mad at her. I was like,
I
go
thought-
down in that gorge and get that
I
tape.
actually thought it was kind of touching because I thought it was her like admitting like that drive, that obsession isn't healthy for her.
There you go.
That's what I thought. But then at
Yeah.
the end, when she became a damsel in distress, I was very disappointed.
She kicked the shit out of that guy.
It's true.
That's true.
It's a tricky thing.
I wanted her to save Nathan.
She did.
She does.
Like in the I wanted the big climax to be like him in distress, her saving him.
Well,
Well, she does. She
does.
says, "Look out!" But it's tough. I mean, especially gender roles. It's you want to play them back and forth. I mean, she's a pretty. Here's the thing. I also don't like people to flip things. I don't want people to write female characters that are cliched, but I don't want people to like do the opposite and say, well, then it's got to be the most capable, person who's going to come.
Like G.I. Jane. all of
Yeah,
a sudden.
whatever. It's like, can they just be human beings?
She was very real.
Yeah,
was.
that's the whole point. I mean, we wanted that with all of the characters. Of course, the more screen time you get, the more time you have to develop that. But she's a human being. Hopefully we wrote her the same way we would if she was male, except for the romantic bits. But I think here's what's hard about the genre too. And this is interesting looking at other games where I don't think this is true. You need other characters in there to be emotional attachments for the hero. And in most games, until recently actually, the hero's usually alone, and the player is usually alone. Whereas you look at the movies, and you always have a cast of characters around you. And those characters are usually in peril. They're kidnapped, they're hurt, they're dead, you think they're dead, you gotta rescue them, they gotta rescue you. And it's those personal attachments which are the important part of the storytelling about what's at stake, usually have some sort of overarching thing that's at stake as well. Don't let the Nazis get the Ark of the Covenant. But that's not actually what you care about. What you care about is somebody is in peril. And so that's the reason we have all that co-op gameplay and all the allies is because we needed those characters to be around and not have this be a solo trek.
Well, you did a great job of making her go from nuisance to like you kind of love her. Because
Yeah,
she's definitely annoying at the beginning.
Well, and that was sort of the point. I mean, he's sort of a dick at the beginning too,
Yeah.
right? So,
Everyone's kind of flawed, actually.
well, that's the
Most people think
we
I'm
all
kind
are.
of a dick when they first meet me.
That's true.
right. So,
See, it's true, right?
I mean, that was intentional. And that means that we just have to make sure that we're writing them as real human beings, and that we have these characters around, which is hard to do in a video game as opposed to a movie. So those personal attachments become part of the storytelling, and I think that's what a lot of people noticed in Uncharted, even though maybe they couldn't articulate it. I think that's one of the differences between our game and maybe games where you're more solo or you're with a squad of people who are equally adept as you are. And that's why I think it felt more like a movie.
It did for me. I mean, I made it no secret that I really enjoyed it. I'm attached. I'm very interested to see.
Maybe I'll get my heroics from her in the next one.
I don't know. I'm really looking forward to see what happens next. Amy, thank you so much
Yeah,
for
thank you very
coming
much.
on.
Good sport.
Much appreciated. Very, very much
No,
appreciated.
it was fun. I appreciate you having me here.
So for Amy and for Brian and Sean,
Hey,
Yes?
can I get a last word?
I thought Sean had a final
Sure.
word.
Because there's going to be so much fallout now
No, go ahead.
on the internet that I'm going to have to deal with when you guys aren't going to be because you're not
I say,
posting. And that's just to say
don't look at
that
it, dude.
despite of everything I said about Metal Gear, I very much enjoyed playing all 3 of the games.
Sean, if you didn't get on there, those threads would die.
I
It's
know.
the fact that
I
you're-
know.
But let me make my point. So I very much enjoyed
sage advice.
those games despite their story, and that's in keeping with everything else I said. The other thing you pointed out about how Metal Gear 2 especially breaks the fourth wall. I thought that was great because that occurred in the game. It occurred in the picture-in-the-picture, the window, in other points of the game too. I thought that was fantastic. But I just don't want people to confuse that I'm saying I don't like the game. And
Unlike Resistance, which you don't like.
that
was a joke. That was a joke.
All right,
All right, on
there
that
you
note,
go.
on that note,
There you go.
on that
Sean
note.
Elliott, Shane Bettenhausen. This is Garnet Lee. Thank you very much for listening. Catch up with us at boards.oneup.com. Until tomorrow, we're Ghost.
Thanks, guys.